It's Sunday afternoon again, and you know what that means. It's time for Inside Trucking. Let's get into it. All right, well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Inside Trucking. I'm James Lamb, your host, Executive Director of the Small Business and Transportation Coalition, and I am coming to you on this Sunday, December 7th, 2025, with episode 16 of Inside Trucking, this week's top 5. So let's get into it. Folks, we have quite a few things to talk about today, and so I'm going to kind of do this in summary format, kind of give you just kind of like the tidbits this time around. So we're going to start off with the latest incident that unfortunately has happened over the last week. It actually happened on Thursday. Thankfully, there's no fatalities to report, but there were some injuries. Truck driver Juan Hernandez, I got to get my glasses again, of Mexico, a foreign national from Mexico, was arrested on Thursday after a 6-car pileup on I-5 in Washington State. He slammed into a school bus. Now, for those of you who have been following me for a while now and, have been watching, the things I put out, I've always talked about these, big rig trucks are out there. They're 80,000 pounds. They go on 65 miles an hour at a minimum on our highways, and they're filled with diesel fuel. And they are like, a missile that you hope is a guided missile, but unfortunately with accidents, bad things can happen. And these missiles can potentially hit a school bus filled with children. I say that over and over again. For decades, I've been saying that. And now here it is. It happened. 4 people were injured and taken to the local hospital. This guy had no CDL. This guy had no insurance. This guy had no medical card, according to the authorities and media reports. And apparently he was working for a California-based company. And it appears that he is a foreign national from Mexico. So information is still coming out because this happened on Thursday, and here it is just a few days later. But once again, it looks like, it's another incident. And folks, we got to talk about this, and in a minute I'm going to talk about our comment on the IFR rulemaking, and we'll talk about more in detail about this. But there's different facets of the problem that we're dealing with here, and it starts out with English proficiency. It starts out with non-English proficient drivers. And then it goes to non-domiciled CDLs being issued to unqualified applicants that are not citizens or permanent legal residents or otherwise qualified to drive and to have a CDL. And those people are getting licenses that they shouldn't get from, these woke states. And then there's like a whole other threshold of just people who are driving without a CDL. And, one of the truck drivers that was involved in the incident with Connor Design back in 2017. And I don't want to say incident or accident. I want to say crash, because that's what Connor's mom told me to say. It's a crash. And it wasn't an accident. Accident means we didn't, mean to do this. A crash is, a bad thing that happens and you should have known better. It's not an accident. So for Melissa, I'm making that statement now. And one of those drivers didn't have a CDL. The other one was from Canada, But so there's 3 different thresholds here, and they're all bad, and they're all against public safety, and they all have to be dealt with and cracked down on. Not even having a CDL is like, it just blows my mind. So that's the latest incident, and like I said, nobody has died. They were minor injuries from what I understand. but they did require that the 4 people go to the hospital involving a school bus. So this is what I've been fearing could happen, and it could happen again, and you know, it could be a lot worse. So we appreciate everything that the administration is doing to crack down on this. Number 2 has to do with an announcement that FMCSA is reorganizing their ELD. Now, this is not ELP. This is, you know, not English language proficiency. This is ELD. So that's electronic logging device that replaced paper logs. They're redoing their vetting process, and I'm not sure exactly, you know, what that's going to entail. This comes in the aftermath of once again, they just removed 5 ELD devices on November 20th, and now here they are on like December 1st saying they're redoing the ELD vetting process. Now, what do we believe that is in the aftermath of? Because we use that term all the time, right? We can't proclaim things are causation, but we certainly can say this happened after that, right? And so what is this and what is that? Well, in November, we made 2 requests to FMCSA to take a look at ELDs. And we brought up national security, and we brought up self-certification, which, you know, we said was a mistake from day one. And we asked them to pause ELDs, you know, way back then. And we just did it again. On November 1st, I think it was, where we put in a petition for reconsideration of our previous petition. And in that case, not only was it a petition like we wrote in and petitioned the government to do something, but it's also an actual online petition that was on whitehouse.gov back in the day. And we found a way to bring that link back up through the Wayback Machine. And it had 30,000 signatures in like a weekend, 32,000 at the end or something like that. It was crazy, just like a few days, and so it was asking the government to pause ELDs until, you know, they can do it the right way and do real certification by FMCSA, because I mean, this is not working. They keep removing devices that were self-certified. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't know what they're going to do with this new vetting process, but we have asked them to take a look at self-certification twice in November. We pointed to all of the, you know, all of the large truck fatalities. We even made a nice little pretty chart from NHTSA data, and we put that up there, and we sent that to FMCSA. You know, back in the day, we were talking about, oh my gosh, you know, 2018 was a 30-year record high in large truck, you know, fatalities. And it's gone beyond that in the last 7 years or so. So, you know, we brought that up. And now in the aftermath of us bringing that up in November, now here they are saying they're working on a new vetting process. So let's see what happens, and let's see how they respond to our petition for reconsideration for them to pause ELDs and temporarily revert back to paper driver logs until they can really get a handle on this. And the national security aspect of this has to do with studies on telematics, because that's what ELDs really are. Telematics in terms of connecting computers to the engine, right, to regulate hours of service and or to monitor hours of service, but they can be hacked. You can take remote control of a telematic device, and it's been proven in studies, and we've been talking about those studies, and we brought those studies to the attention of previous administrations, and now we've asked for reconsideration until, you know, we really understand what's going on. Because, you know, somebody could take a hold remotely of a truck, and they can make it speed up, and they can make it brake, and they can make it swerve into a school bus filled with children. So we'll see, you know, what happens with that. All right, the quest for crackdown on illegal issuance of non-domicile CDLs continues. You've been following what's going on, you know, in California since August, right? non-conformity letters, non-compliance letters. Another one is due out any day now in terms of a final determination of non-compliance with Chapter 313 of the U.S. Code 49, Title 49, because California had a deadline of December 1st. So not sure what's going to happen there, but I'm pretty sure decertification is on the table, and we're hoping Secretary, does what needs to be done as per his duty to do so if he finds permanent or final, substantial noncompliance. So we're waiting for that any day. Hopefully we'll be talking about that next week. And in the meantime, they're cracking down on Minnesota now, right? So Minnesota got one of those letters, and now they have 30 days to respond. So lots of things happening. These people are getting very aggressive with this issue, and God bless them for doing what's right by the industry and by the public in terms of highway safety, public safety. In addition to that, Secretary Duffy is also cracking down on these CDL test training centers, right? 3,000 of them are about to be revoked, and they're looking at more. And it all has to do with whether they are corrupt and illegitimately giving CDLs to people who really should not pass the skills test, and that includes English language proficiency during skills testing. So what's supposed to be and what's supposed to happen and what's been happening, it's like we're in an alternate reality as to the way this is supposed to operate. And so Secretary Duffy is now looking at those CDL test training centers. The federal regulations allow the states to even outsource the skills testing to these private entities, and that's what causes this kind of stuff. They have every motivation to pass people who they shouldn't pass, so that those people tell their friends it's easy to pass if you go to this school, right? So thank goodness that they're cracking down on that. And then the fifth thing that I want to talk about today is that SBTC, we filed a comment. It was a late comment. It was filed on Wednesday after we got leave to do so on Tuesday from Larry Minor at FMCSA. It was kind of a tough week the week before with that that horrible shooting. National Guardsmen guards people right outside SBTC's call center, a block away. So we said, hey, we could use a little more time here. We're still trying to stop shaking after that incident. And they said, yeah, we'll take your late comment. So we filed that comment the next day on Wednesday, December 3rd. And it is a comment that supports the final rule, and B, alludes to how we're going to support the final rule in that court case, that public citizen court case involving two unions, that really don't have much to do with trucking, but they seem to think so, and they've challenged the IFR. So we said what you see in this comment is what you're going to see essentially in our amicus brief that will be filed shortly with the Court of Appeals. So this is the IFR that Secretary Duffy and FMCSA, then General Counsel Jesse Ellison, or Ellison, I think is the pronunciation, is what they did on September 26th. They announced the IFR, and it was published on the 29th, the following Monday in the Federal Register. And it's called Restoring Integrity to the Issuance of Non-Domiciled Commercial Driver Licenses. And it's really a crackdown on states that have been doing it wrong. And this is FMCSA docket 2025-0622, if you want to go to the Federal Register and look that up. And so, we start off with a background about this issue. And we basically frame this as, this is evolving. And the understanding of what's wrong here has evolved. And it started out with ELP. And people are operating trucks and they shouldn't be because they don't speak English, and you have to read the signs, especially when they say slow down, accident ahead. And so it started out as that, and then over the summer, it evolved into, beyond that, non-domicile issuance by these woke states that are issuing licenses that they shouldn't be to illegal immigrant truckers that really shouldn't be here, and many of them don't speak English proficiently, and now it's like it's crazy, it's a matter of them going after these schools and looking at these cheating scandals by truckers in Jacksonville and other places, cameras in the t-shirts and turbans. It's insane. And then pay to play, scandals in Long Island, New York, DMV, New York DMV, where, there's bribery going on to get a CDL. I mean, it's insane. Washington School was shut down a while back, and now they're looking at 3,000 schools. So we started off by basically saying, it's January 20th. The president is back, right? He's installed at inauguration, and it's round 2. And by the time he, gets to appoint Secretary Duffy, we immediately contacted Duffy, and we said, congratulations. By the way, we got to talk about English language proficiency and a whole bunch of other issues. But we emailed him on February 15th about ELP, so you know. And he was then copied on another email on February 17th, where we asked the Inspector General to reconsider our 2022 request for them to re-audit CDL standards in reference to their May 8th, 2002 CDL standards audit. And we said, to the Inspector General, we're going to try again. We think you should re-audit. And we copied Secretary Duffy on that, that February 17th email. And now, as you know, on September 19th, lo and behold, after they said no, but they also kind of said, maybe we'll, do it within the next 5 years on our 5-year plan. That kind of leaked out during a FOIA request. I don't think they wanted us to see that, but that somebody slipped and they let us know, because they had said no, and they really meant in the future we're going to do it. And so now, September 19th, OIG finally announced that audit. And it's called FMCSA's Oversight of State Commercial Driver License Knowledge and Skills Testing Program. It's exactly what we're asking for. So that happened, and then a day later, February 18th, we wrote to Sue Lawless, who was kind of running the show as acting administrator at that point, and Larry Minor at FMCSA, again copying Secretary Duffy, and we said, hey. A lot of people are talking about this Obama-era June 15th, 2016 stand-down directive, ELP enforcement stand-down directive. And you've all seen that by now, the picture of that memo. It's known as internally as MC-ECE-2016-006. You can Google that and the picture will come up. So we were asking Lawless and Minor, hey, is that still in full force and effect? Like, from 2016? Like, really? Are you really, stopping people and finding out they're not qualified under your regulations to operate commercial motor vehicles because they don't speak English, and you just let them continue on their way with a little ticket, and then they can kill somebody down the road? So you're not really, still enforcing that, right? Is that still on the table? And magically, lo and behold, you know what happened next, right? So then they started looking at that, and Dave Taylor's office, we told him about it, and he's like, what? And he said, can you show that to me? And so we showed that to them, and then they sent it to the Transportation and Infrastructure T&I committee, and so they reviewed that. And then we started in March, drafting and sending to Congress our version of Connor's Law, partnering with Melissa, Connor's mom, and And we basically said, we need a law that does two things, right? One is to require the states to test for English language proficiency during the first phase of CDL testing, the knowledge testing, the written exam. And two, if you find people that are unqualified, you got to put them out of service. And so Dave Taylor has now sponsored two bills. First one is Connor's Law that addresses put them out of service. And then the second one has to do with testing for English language proficiency in the form of giving the knowledge exam in English. So that happened. And after we started doing that, it looks like that's when Secretary Duffy, because we sent him a copy of Connor's Law, that's when he took this to the president. And that's when you saw on April 28th, the president's executive order, right? And he said, we're going to repeal that stand down MCECE 2016-006 memorandum. And that happened on May 20th by order of the secretary. So we don't know what's causing what. There's other groups that are talking about this stuff too. But we keep talking about how such and such happens in the aftermath of things that we've done. So, we'd like to think we're having some impact and some influence on this stuff. And so you also know that on May 27th, we started asking for decertification orders for these states who are not in compliance with CDL standards. And we petitioned for a decertification order citing all these states. And now, all these letters are going out threatening decertification and loss of funding. We asked for loss of funding, too, in our decertification petition. And then, after that, in June, on June 2nd, we petitioned FMCSA for rulemaking to make the states test for English during written knowledge testing as a matter of regulation. So, folks, we're trying to go the full gamut here. We're trying to address this issue, with Secretary Duffy, and we're trying to address it with, the agency, and we're trying to address it with Congress. And we're basically trying to say, hey, we got to codify this so that this is in law. It's not a matter of regulation that an agency can waive or, deregulate or, issue moratoriums like this Obama era, be nice to the unqualified Spanish-speaking people who are driving trucks because, civil rights are at stake. This isn't a rule. This is a rule that doesn't, target any particular language. It just says you got to speak English in order to drive a truck. And it's been around since 1936. So come on, And so then, on June 25th, after President Trump and Secretary Duffy acted, that's when CVSA, then reinstated ELP violation to its out-of-service criteria. So, folks, we're definitely having an impact here, and we're proud to, be affecting these changes because this is reform, and this is much needed reform for the industry and ultimately for the public in terms of public and highway safety. And like I said, then everything starts to change, over the summer. And then they start talking about non-domicile and, the states issuing driver licenses to illegal immigrants. And that's just not allowed in the regulations. You have to prove that you're a citizen or a lawful permanent resident, or you got the right, type of a visa, and you're allowed, to be here. And now Secretary Rubio has, drastically changed that. He's not giving out those visas to truck drivers anymore. So this is really cleanup time. And that's what the IFR attempts to do. IFR stands for Interim Final Rule. And so this comment is in support of that rule. And don't forget that, during the summer and as late as October 16th, we wrote to Attorney General Pam Bondi. So as they were doing this at FMCSA and, Secretary Duffy on the enforcement of the CDL standards front, I guess you would say, we were doing this on a different front. We were saying, hey, this is really bad. This really needs to be cleaned up. And there's a lot of corruption going on here. And we think it's like racketeering corruption, like corrupt organization, RICO. And so we contacted Pam Bondi 3 times in 60 days, the last of which was October 16th, and we asked for federal criminal RICO investigations into multiple states' CDL issuing agency, specifically targeting California, New York, no name given New York, right, and Illinois and Pennsylvania, who likes to apparently give CDLs to suspected terrorists, So we said we think this is a matter of receiving federal funds, promising through certified assurances you're going to comply with the program, and then you have no intention of complying with the program. So that, in our opinion, is a scheme to defraud the federal government, right? So time for a RICO investigation. So we kind of start our comment with, with all of, we even quote that Attorney General letter in the comment, and that's available through our social media platforms. And we'll put the link in the description of this episode as well. And then we start to to talk about some substance of the IFR and how it reconciles with the Administrative Procedure Act. And many of you know that the APA is a federal law that governs the procedures of administrative law for administrative agencies. And it's found at 5 United States Code sections 551 to 559. And 551 actually is the definitions section, and it defines that rulemaking is the agency process for formulating, amending, or repealing a rule. Now, the public citizen case, right, challenges the IFR on the basis of they didn't go through the normal public notice and comment rulemaking. They say it's arbitrary and capricious. They question the data substantiating the need to do this as an emergency, and so we address this, and we basically back the agency up. We back Secretary Duffy and FMCSA up, and we say, there's an exception to that normal process of public notice and comment when there's an emergency, and when the agency, for good cause, finds, right, that notice and public procedure is impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest. And so that's what they asserted in this instance when they made this interim final rule without having received public comment yet, enforceable and active immediately. And it's really blocking a lot of licenses that were never issued properly in the first place. And so the law actually says, with good cause, an agency may also make a rule effective immediately upon publication. So the operative phrase here is for good cause. And so there's a stay on this IFR from that public citizen case from the Court of Appeals in the D.C. Circuit. Emergency stay was requested, and it's been granted. And ultimately, it's a 3-judge panel. And by one judge, the majority, 2 against 1, said, yeah, we're going to grant the stay. And this IFR did start a comment period, and that's what the whole purpose of this letter is. This is our comment on this IFR. But it's being done after it's already effective, but now, it's been stayed. So basically, we support the FMCSA in this, and we basically say, that the matter of good cause is really an agency determination. It's an agency judgment. And, we talk about how, Chevron deference is gone, right? The Supreme Court overturned that, that doctrine. But that does not mean that there should be judicial activism, then allows the court to second guess, the agency determination of good cause. That's their call. And so we actually, pointed out the dissenting judge's points, Judge Henderson, that their job is to determine whether the agency presented sufficient evidence in support of its good cause determination. And she said, I think that they have, and we agree. And we also think that she's right when she says that the agency did not act in a arbitrary and capricious fashion because it was closing a loophole. And that loophole was that there's a rule that says before a state is supposed to issue a CDL, it's supposed to check with the previous state that issued CDL in terms of the record to see what the safety record and violations are and all that. And if you're a illegal immigrant and you had a equivalent of a CDL in another country, they can't do that. They can't check the record. And so because of that, they said they were closing that loophole. And this judge agreed, and the other two, of course, did not. And we think that's correct as well. That's not arbitrary. It's not on a whim, right? That's like, we got an issue here, and we got to figure out how we're going to resolve it. In the meantime, we're going to put a pause on all this. And she also pointed out that it's unreasonable to translate an example of large truck fatalities. I think they offered like 5, and interpret that as that's the only incidents that there have been. That's what the other two judges seem to have done. They seem to say, well, that's not a lot, 5, and this Judge Henderson says, well, the agency has the right to say that's 5, and that's 5 too many, and there are more. We're just giving you an example. So, and then we point out that it's also unreasonable to suggest that it's even possible for FMCSA to have pre-IFR data to offer to the court readily on hand that would substantiate the agency's good cause determination, which was already based on valid determinations in terms of those specific incidents and audit data. 25% were issued illegally, right? As the states would have to voluntarily cough up more data than the FMCSA is discovering through these audits. And they have to basically admit that they have been illegally issuing CDLs to truck drivers who are not U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents or otherwise qualify having legal immigration status with foreign passports and visas. And basically, we're saying that, this whole thing is it's a farce because, it's just, it's just insane to go with the majority's rule here and expect that states are going to voluntarily cooperate. That's the whole purpose of these non-conformity and non-compliance letters. They're not cooperating. They're not cooperating, on multiple levels, including SNAP benefits, right? Some of the states don't want to tell the feds where, those benefits go. Well, we don't have to, This is absolute defiance in many different ways, and it all has to do with border control and illegal immigration. And then, it's about voting. It's about voter ID and who you're letting vote, right? Illegal immigrants, so that they vote Democrat, right? So that we can stay in power or win power back. I mean, the whole thing is corrupt. And now there's a guy in prison who's saying Venezuela has something to do with these election machines that are corrupt and manipulative or manipulatable, I guess you would say. That you can get these machines and fix an election, like Trump said, and like people said back in 2020, and so all this stuff is all about political corruption. And really, that's why we're saying to AG Bondi, go look at this from a racketeering, corrupt organization, standpoint. These states have to be investigated, and these politicians who are telling the governor of California, Newcomb, who's telling apparently the California Highway Patrol, don't put anybody out of service for 391.11B2 after the president just told you to. That this whole thing has to be investigated, and it really has to be a criminal investigation, because taking funding away, is not enough. People have to go to prison. And one time, the governor of Illinois was investigated under RICO like 20 years ago, and he was put in prison for a pay-to-play bribery CDL scheme. So we've cited that to Bondi, and we've said it's time for that again. That's what we need here. So hopefully something's cooking with that request, and we'll be able to report that something happened in the aftermath of us asking for something to happen, right? So, and they're looking, like I said, at Minnesota now, and no name given. I mean, terrorists or suspected terrorists getting CDLs. It's insane. 3,000 schools now under investigation for non-compliance. So what we basically recap then is we say, when viewed all together, all the background going back to 2022 when we first started screaming about English language proficiency, right up to mid-February when Duffy first got there and we said, hey, you need to look at ELP immediately. It's a national crisis. When viewed together, all the things that have happened, all the people who have died, the Singh, truckers who killed 3 people each, one in Florida, one in California, and all these different, terrible, life-altering, life-ending, incidents. Viewed all together, it illustrates a significant CDL integrity emergency and a nationwide life-threatening public safety crisis that called for this IFR. And, the government said, we did this and we made it effective immediately so that there wasn't a rash of people trying to get in at the last moment while a comment period was going on, that people that were trying to stop from getting in. And these states are giving them, the licenses, and we're trying to stop that. So there's absolutely justification for what the government did here. I'm a big due process guy. I've screamed about due process for decades, especially when my own due process is violated, whether it's, the states and the 14th Amendment or the federal government, the 5th Amendment. I'm a big proponent of due process. But what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with an emergency, and we're dealing with, the exceptions here outweigh, the need to give the normal due process that, is meant, to protect people's rights. The people who are dying have rights. The people who have no sons, like Melissa, has no son because of these issues, they have rights. Connor himself and all these people who have died this year, they have civil rights. They had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And who's sticking up for their rights, right? So, due process is all well and good. But if you skip due process to get into the country, you have some nerve acting like you're a U.S. citizen that's entitled to due process under the U.S. Constitution, because that's supposed to be for American citizens. And here you are, you skipped it on the way in, and now you're claiming you need due process on the way out? Come on. So, enough is enough. It's time not to be tolerant here anymore, and it's time to move forward with common sense, policies and laws and rulemaking. And we are on track for that. That's what this administration is doing. That's what this president is doing. I have been critical of President Trump in the past, but I got to tell you, President Trump round 2 here with this issue and many other issues, this guy is doing what America needs as public policy. And his administration and his cabinet, they're right on track as to where they need to be. Congress is stepping up. There are so many bills in Congress about this issue, about English language proficiency and English testing and illegal immigrants somehow squeezing in, and what to do when you find people who don't speak English, on the road that slip through. This is a major issue. This is probably the issue of the year in trucking. You want to know what's going on inside trucking? This is what's going on inside trucking. So that's it for today, folks. And as usual, I thank you for spending this afternoon with me to discover and learn about the top 5 things that happened this week. As of December 7th, 2025, today is Pearl Harbor Day. We need to remember the men and women that we lost in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor, back so many years ago. So with that said, I hope you have a good rest of the weekend and that you stay safe. I look forward to seeing you next Sunday, and hopefully we'll have some breaking news and some good things to talk about as we continue our quest to make the roads safe again. I'm James Lamb, your host, Inside Trucking. See you next time.